On behalf of I Am Nagpur fraternity, we'd like to welcome you. And so we'll be starting the panel.
Since its foundation in 2015, the Indian Institute of Management Nagpur has strived to create value-driven leaders, global managers, and entrepreneurs with strong conceptual foundations and an analytical approach that helps students excel in their chosen fields. Through its high-quality education, research, and industry engagement, the institution aims to address the needs of a modern India innovatively, thereby connecting aspirations and realities to attain benchmarks that are respected internationally.
We would like to welcome our first panelist, Professor Yogesh Dubey from Chairs Veloutsou University, UK.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. And, I know it's holiday time, so I'm truly grateful to my esteemed panel members for being here. They are giving up their personal time, that they should be enjoying with their family. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for contributing to this panel. Thank you to...
Recording stopped.
Thank you to, obviously...
Recording in progress.
Director I Am Nagpur and Conference Chair for inviting us and providing opportunity to connect with the conference audience. My particular thanks to Professor Katina Michael for agreeing to moderate this session. I am very much looking forward to having a very fruitful and engaging discussion during this panel. So without taking further time, I know the time is tight and there is another session at 4:30, so we have to actually end by 4:30. So without taking further time, I'm passing it to Katina to moderate the session. And thank you again to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yogesh, for this wonderful welcome to this eclectic panel, which we all have the joy of being on today as we celebrate the end of the year and also all our successes and perhaps even disappointments as we reflect on publishing in 2021 and actually throughout our lifetime. It's a gift actually to publish and to have something there that will actually have a longevity beyond us. And so with the joy of the festive season, the joy of being with fellow collaborators on this panel, new faces, old faces, I welcome all of you again. I think as your moderator today, I'm humbled actually to have this journey over the next 2 hours with the audience in Greater Noida, in India and beyond the borders of India, and also with my fellow panelists. My name is Katina Michael. I herald from Arizona State University. I'm coming to you live from Gerringong in New South Wales, Australia at the moment, and a little bit about myself perhaps before we move on. I've had the joy of being involved in editing from very early on in my career. It's been a gift. I was tapped on the shoulder when I was perhaps in my mid-20s, not very long after I started in academia out of industry, and was mentored by someone from South America, of all places, in Chile. We began a new journal at the time called the Journal of Theoretical and Applied Electronic Commerce Research. And through that 6-year journey, we not only became established as an impact-factored journal, but also met so many diverse people, ran into so many different situations. And as technical editor serving there as a young person, I got to see everything from beginning to end. But editors are a special breed. We wear the hat of an author. Many times we wear the hat of a reviewer. As associate editors, co-editors, guest editors, and even editors-in-chief. Many of us today have diverse interests in a number of different journal publication outlets, some with great impact factors and others just starting out, and other roles in conferences, just like this one. So we value all of these opportunities, and they're all learning experiences, and they all can attract high quality publications. So what is it that we will be talking about today? My brief reflections on what makes publishing in a high quality journal is a 3-stage process. I've lived and breathed this throughout the last 25 years of my life. Perhaps in the first 7 years, not quite successfully, but as that third bullet point says there, persistence pays off. And I know most of the editors on this panel had a similar journey. What makes you get into a high quality journal? The first thing is definitely preparation. It's knowing where you will target, why you will target, why you are doing the research that you're doing. How does the journal accept papers? In what kind of format? For which audience? Is it an informed commentary? Is it something more sophisticated like empirical research requiring theory and method? This is what all our panelists will generally be talking about today. So I will not steal their thunder. I will just say that my second point is presence. You have to have presence. Your article must stand out among the field of articles being submitted to a particular journal publication outlet. 1 in 100 perhaps, depending on which journal you're trying to get into. What presence will you have? And I know some of our panelists will be talking about that aspect. And persistence. If you get a major revision 3 times in a row, another one is a minor revision. Persist. Listen to your reviewers, listen to your editors-in-chief. Learn from that feedback and move on. Introducing the panel. Amongst us, I think there are over 110,000 citations. I think we must know something about publishing perhaps today in this amazing panel. We herald from over 10 different countries. We have affiliations with over 25 different countries. We've done degrees beyond what I could imagine as a collective group. We have perhaps amongst ourselves been in more than 5 to 6 different publication outlets at once, sometimes wearing more senior roles and other times acting as permanent reviewers. So I can't wait to introduce to you Roba Abbas, Kieran Conboy, Rameshwar Dubey, Marijn Janssen, Paul Jones, Thanos Papadopoulos, Samuel Fosso-Wamba, Cleopatra Veloutsou, Giampaolo, Viglia, and also Yogesh Dubey. The way that it'll work this afternoon is that we will be speaking in alphabetical order to surname. Each panelist will take approximately 6 minutes, offering a brief introduction about themselves, editorial responsibilities, and then the response to the panel theme. As an audience member, we request that you might submit your Q&A, your questions and queries perhaps to us via Zoom if you have access to that online. And afterwards, at the end of the presentations, available panelists will address the remaining questions, if not typing their responses to you as we go. Tips for asking questions: we welcome your comments, but questions will be taken first. Keep your questions brief and focused on a single point, and if you so wish, offer perhaps a targeted question to a given panelist. So, over to Professor Giampaolo Viglia from the University of Portsmouth.
Many thanks for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I know thanks for being here at the very end of the year, but I think that this is a very exciting session. So I will keep it brief. So I'm Giampaolo Viglia, and I'm at University of Portsmouth, and I'm actually a professor of marketing. So we can move to the next slide. But while we move there, I really thank Katina and Yogesh for organizing this and all the wonderful colleagues. Well, the journal that I edit, Psychology and Marketing, of course, deals with issues like the name says that are at the intersection between psychology and marketing. And we look at manuscripts that are applying psychological theories and techniques to marketing. We are open in terms of manuscript type, so it can be a review paper, an empirical paper, or in terms of empirical paper, we are open to qualitative and quantitative, but let me offer some specific tips. So first of all, one suggestion, the first suggestion that I can make is try to build international research collaborations. From my experience, when we receive manuscripts where authors are coming from different institutions and so on. Then also the data are coming from different parts of the world. The work is more generalizable and it creates more impact. So that's the first take home. The second is that we care about a clear storyline and a critical literature review, like maybe you can use a literature review table. So it's really important that you bring out your contribution. As you know, journals are under pressure. We need more and more reviewers. So actually reviewers get a first sense of the paper after reading the introduction or the literature review. So it's really important, the very first part of the paper, so that you can make a sense of the contribution. In psychology and marketing, we are also very keen that you present multiple complementary studies. So this will give robustness to your conclusions. So if you can include multiple studies, that would really help. And I was checking in the Financial Times and Wall Street journals, and actually today was saying that 2022 will be the year of data visualization. And I really believe in that. So use compelling figures and tables. That will be very useful for all other authors writing on the topics. Even if you share your things on social media, you will have a nice figure summarizing your paper. That would really help. Of course, try to make sure that the manuscript reads well. As you see, I'm based in the US, in the UK for more than 10 years, but I still have a strong Italian accent. So make sure that the manuscript reads well. It's not an issue, but we need to try to have that. And we do have some special issues. So if you check our website, we have a January call for special issues, and you can see the current special issues that we do have. So if you want to send a manuscript on a timely topic and something that you feel is relevant, feel free to submit it. So many thanks again. I kept it brief because I know that we have many excellent colleagues, so I leave it to them.
Thank you, Giampaolo. Next up, we have Dr. Roba Abbas from the University of Wollongong, a senior lecturer and also a visiting professor at Arizona State University in 2022. Welcome, Roba.
Thank you, Professor Michael. I'd like to extend my gratitude to Professor Yogesh Dubey and the organisers of this conference for the invitation to present with such esteemed colleagues and panellists. As Katina mentioned, my name is Roba Abbas and I lecture into and coordinate operations and information systems courses and am an academic program director in the School of Business in the Faculty of Business and Law at the University of Wollongong, Australia. Today, I'll be speaking in my capacity as a co-editor of the IEEE Transactions on Technology and Society, Transactions or TTS for short, supplemented by my experience as an associate editor of the IEEE Technology and Society magazine, among other related roles in the IEEE. This includes things such as standard development working groups, the IEEE Australia Council, and involvement in the IEEE International Symposium on Technology and Society. All of these roles relate to the publication process. However, my focus will be on what we look for and how we determine high quality manuscripts within the transactions, with points listed on the following slide. Thank you, Katina. Applying to publishing in general beyond the IEEE. I'll begin briefly by providing some context to the IEEE as part of point 1 in discussing the selection of a publication outlet. The IEEE is the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers and is the largest professional technical association globally. When considering publishing high quality work within an IEEE outlet, the initial step is to understand the diverse outlets available and consider which is suited to your research. Examples of peer-reviewed outlets include, but are not limited to, conference proceedings, magazines, journals. There's IEEE Access, transactions such as ours, letters and reviews and proceedings of the IEEE. As part of that first step, determining the most appropriate outlet requires research and concerted planning, as it's critical to the remaining points on the slide and to the publications process more broadly. The choice of outlet will dictate scope, stylistic elements, among other considerations, and there needs to be a compatibility between your research and the respective outlet. Making sure your research aligns to the scope of the selected outlet is paramount. In the context of our transactions, for example, we publish socio-technical research papers that explore the intersection of STEM disciplines with socio-ethical and regulatory implications, where we are interested in ethical, professional, and social responsibility, in addition to the impacts of developments in the STEM disciplines on individuals, businesses, and industry, and also on society. We are a transdisciplinary outlet of the IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technology, and one of the few transactions within the IEEE that traverses both the technical and the non-STEM domains. So we cover a range of emerging and other technologies such as artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, robotics, and others, in view of both the social and technical considerations. So if we go back to the point, if we are to receive high quality manuscripts that are solely technical in nature and do not satisfy the requirement of addressing socio-technical interactions, for example, the manuscript does not pass desk review. Papers must also integrate the technical and social considerations rather than bolting on society after the results section. Regarding this point, and in general, when seeking to submit to a journal or an outlet, it's helpful to study previously published papers. So when you have determined that your manuscript is within scope, something I'd like to note here for consideration as a third point is to decide whether you will prepare and or develop your work for consideration in a general issue or alternatively a special issue that aligns with your research. As such, it's worth reviewing any current call for papers or CFPs for relevance. Another option to explore is whether to submit a proposal for a new special issue, which will be subject to approval by the editor-in-chief or the co-editor board, where there is a recognised gap in existing research or a topic area that warrants further collective consideration. Irrespective of whether you elect a general issue versus a special issue, we recommend that authors strictly adhere to additional requirements as stipulated by the outlet. One such example, given that we are a transactions, is that we only publish empirical research that clearly demonstrates novelty or an original contribution to existing scholarship and has a strong theoretical basis, as noted in the fourth point on the slide. This is distinct from our equivalent magazine, which is the IEEE Technology and Society magazine, which accepts a broader range of publication types that might not necessarily be empirical, but still need to be of a high publication standard. And this brings us to the fifth and final point I'd like to highlight here, which is around manuscript preparation and development, back to Katina's original point and reflections. So preparation pre-review should be completed in accordance with templating and other requirements. For example, in IEEE transactions, journals and letters, you need to conform to the same requirements around preparation, the use of figures, images, equations, references, review stages, submissions portal, and so on. In terms of that second point, as part of point 5, the manuscript development post-review, there is certainly an opportunity to utilise our rigorous peer review process for further developing your manuscript, and the same goes for any peer review process, regardless of whether the manuscript has been recommended for publication or not. And there are options for redirecting to other IEEE outlets based on suitability. So this is a brief overview of the 5 points that I believe are valuable when planning for publishing high quality manuscripts in general within the IEEE and in IEEE transactions on technology and society more specifically. So those manuscripts that ideally address a real world challenge, demonstrate rigor, contribute to existing knowledge, reach the intended audience, and also have a real world impact. Thank you, Katina.
Thanks so much, Roba. Now over to Professor Kieran Conboy from Niue in Ireland, the Editor-in-Chief of Aegis.
Great, thanks a million, Katina, and thanks to Katina and Yogesh for inviting me for this. It's really great to be a part of this event, and with all of these things, I mean, I know we spend a few minutes each talking about our own views and things, but I always find in these I actually learn as much or more than I maybe impact on others. But anyway, it's great to be invited. So yeah, it's really challenging, I guess, to think of a few things or one slide on how to guide people. If I think about our journal, the European Journal of Information Systems, it gets a huge volume of submissions because it's now ranked as a 4 in the ABS list and an A-star in the ABDC, and it's part of the IS Senior Scholars Basket list. So it is an important journal. And I guess it is, in a simple line, it's like a lot of the other journals will say in the basket. The only thing is, I think Aegis prides itself in trying to be different and accept some of those papers that might look a bit weird or non-standard in other journals. We all have a perception, or some of us have a perception, that some journals there's almost a formula for publishing in them. Now, I'm not sure how true that is either, but certainly in Aegis, we focus on interesting, good quality research, but are definitely not bounded in terms of what that means. So we have some very, very different looking papers that make their way in. If I think though about some advice for publishing in Aegis and other journals, I just picked out a few of the main points for me. And the first one is, I know it's been mentioned already, but telling your story really clearly and really simply. Most papers get rejected, or at least the reason for rejecting is underpinned by a lack of clarity and there's too much going on. And you're trying to find exactly what the focus is and where exactly the contribution is. And us as authors, we love writing about stuff. We've done loads of work and we love squeezing it all in. But very often the papers that tell one really narrow story, but tell that so well and so consistently, and are fairly brutal, and are the authors are fairly brutal in terms of cutting and stuff out, even though it's good to keep that focus on that one story. Those are usually the ones that make it over the line. The second point then, or third point that I'd mention here on the slide is about using nested motivations and taking counter arguments head on. So one little tip I would use is, because us as authors, we all think our own work is great and we love our own area and all of that. Sometimes we end up with reviewers that I don't mean are very negative, but may not be convinced by your area or may not be that strong in your area. They may be picked because of their methodological expertise, for example. So if they see a new paper on, we'll say, new methods for AI, their opening thought might be, look, the methods used to develop systems for the last 40 years are the same, and the challenges of developing AI are the same as they have been for the last 40 years. There's no difference. So your argument then needs to be, actually, sorry, I'm going to take that head on. You may think that there are no differences between AI and other systems that have been developed over the last 40 years, but here are 1, 2, or 3 very, very significant or very specific differences that counter your argument. So my overall suggestion would be, assume the reviewer isn't really a big fan of your area, not sure of the value of your area, and even if they are, they think, well, your stuff has been done already, in the nicest way possible. Most reviewers are positive, hopefully, but imagine they're not, and try and tackle them head on. So, and think of nested motivations. The reason I talk about nested ones is most people usually throw out one big motivation. Like, we're in a very fluid and dynamic world, and AI is an emerging technology, and we've no ways of dealing with this. So actually, instead of just one overall motivation, think of the 3, 4, or 5 reasons why this study needs to be done. The advantage of doing that is, if you come up with one motivation and the reviewer doesn't like it, then you're kind of shot, and you may get rejected on that grounds alone. Most reviewers form a very strong opinion on a paper on the first page or 2. So if you have one argument for this paper and they don't buy it, you're not off to a great start. However, if you give them 3 or 4 or 5 reasons why this is an important study, even if some of them are small, then okay, the reviewer might knock number 1. They might even knock your second reason for motivating the study. But it's very unlikely they're going to be able, if you've got nice references and good arguments, it's very unlikely they're going to be able to knock all 5 or 3 or 4. So definitely don't put all your eggs in one basket. Think of the 3 or 4 reasons for this study and make sure you say it very clearly. Say that there are 4 reasons for this study, and now force them to dismiss each one of them in turn. And it's very hard to have the energy for a reviewer to have energy to do that 4 times. And then just the last point, which the coherence, which ties into the story that I mentioned earlier on. When a lot of papers or some papers don't have coherence between the sections. And you end up writing a methodology and you don't link it back to the paper. You just say, here's our methodology and what we did. But a good paper links the whole story from beginning to end. The reason for that is if I read a method section and it's just dropped in, or a theory, let's say a part of a theory section about a concept or something, I can start as a reviewer, I can start to pick it apart. If I don't know exactly why you're talking about it, I can start to pick holes and things you haven't cited and things you haven't done and alternative frameworks you could have used. But if you explain at the start, look, I know there are many frameworks out there. I know there are many concepts. I'm picking this one for this reason. And then in your cover letter, you say, well, look, I picked that for that reason. I'm happy to go with another one if the reviewer thinks there's a better option, but this is the one I've chosen and this is why it's part of my story. Then again, the reviewer might come back and say, I'm not sure you picked the right one, and you might think about something else. But at least you've justified and you've shown your story and how this piece fits in. But if you leave it open and just dropped in, then it leaves you wide open for the reviewer to pick all kinds of problems and arguments and alternatives that could have been chosen, which if we knew this overall story and you were clear in the overall story, they wouldn't have been able to, you could have shown that those weren't really that feasible or worthwhile. My very last point that I mentioned, then I know it might be a little over time, is in the interest of the overall conference theme on fluidity. One thing that tends to happen with a lot of submissions is we tend to pick up on this fluid concept. And we talk about the new world is so dynamic, it's so fast paced, it's so fluid. Everything that's gone before is irrelevant. This is now what we need to look at. So blockchain, AI, new methods, agile, agile gone, too old. We need to look at this. And in some cases that might be true, but change and dynamism has been there for a long time. It's not, I know COVID is maybe extreme, but it's not, it's still, it was a fluid and dynamic world before, even though it might be a little bit more fluid and dynamic now. So if you're going to put forward papers based on this idea of we're now in a time of change that's so fast that nothing before is worthwhile, I'd make sure you point back to older stuff and show how it isn't worthwhile in the current context. But just as overall assumption that change suddenly started happening in 2019 might be a little tenuous or a little flawed. Again, if anybody wants to chat afterwards about Aegis or your work, I'd be really happy to chat to people, and hand you back to Katina. And sorry for going a little bit over.
No, these are words of wisdom. Kieran, thank you so much for those invaluable insights, and again to Dr. Abbas. Next up, we have Dr. Rameshwar Dubois, and I would say, forgive me, Dubey. I would say we're going to hear equally important comments from him. Rameshwar, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Katina, and thank you very much to Professor Yogesh Dubey for giving me an opportunity to be here. It has been a nice session actually, and I'll tell you that the Professor Kieran Conboy and Professor Roba has already actually raised several questions, and I'm building upon the previous editor's arguments. I would like to throw some important lights on that, because as an associate editor of several journals, I actually have been facing severe challenges when it comes to introduction and discussion section. You must have seen there is an increasing trend towards data analysis. People are more focusing on structural equation modeling, or people are using the method without having a proper philosophical stance. Unfortunately, I have seen there is a big gap when it comes to philosophical understanding of the research. Again, I always tell the people that get back to the basics actually. Why not you read the textbook of Saunders et al. And try to understand the research Indian framework. Please try to brush up actually, because what happened? When you see the gaps in research questions and the choice of the method, there is no match. And in fact, I've seen the submissions in the top journals, because recently what happened, I've been handling articles, and I was as a consulting advisor for the California Management Review article. And I've seen that there are, even in the top journals, there are submissions which are flawed actually. Although it passes through the eyes of the associate editor, sometimes, it's very challenging task because we cannot expect everyone to be the expert. But we have seen that, that when it comes to like clarity, and as you rightly said, that all the panel members have agreed that the story is missing actually. Now, when there is a question like research gaps, and I always request people that why not have an opportunity to read an article by Alvison and Sandberg in 2011, published in Academy of Management Review. Please try to understand how to actually identify your gaps, research gap. We have seen that most of the times we have seen that scholars actually identifying the research gaps without understanding whether it's a gap. Do we need to address or tackle those research questions? Secondly, most of the times we have been talking about what, why, and how, but people fail to argue or tackle the question when. And that's why the role of moderating construct comes into the picture. In fact, in most of the articles, we have seen that there is an actually increasing trend of the theory, basically, especially in operations, information management, all those strategic management and the marketing field have been using organizational theories for almost a decade. But in recent years, you find that there is an increasing trend toward the adoption of theories. Very good. But my question is that, do people really understand the boundaries of the theory? This is something which is very important. I've seen that people actually, one hand, are talking about resource-based view sometimes, and it's a very funny actually, you've seen that most of the manuscript talks about integrating resource-based view, knowledge-based view, and dynamic capability view. Come on, how it's possible that you can integrate these theoretical perspectives actually, which are actually evolved from a similar core actually. So, the misuse of the theories and the most important aspect that we have to understand that every time researchers, they claim actually that, they perform some of the data analysis, and every time they talk about, since it's a single informant questionnaire and common method bias cannot be rectified, then why people are not designing a multi-informant question as suggested by Ketekiewicz Kroider in 2004, published in Journal Operations Management, and many other articles have raised the issue that one, we know that common method bias problem cannot be resolved, then why we're still sticking with the same old method and continue with the same problem actually? Then there is no point of writing in the limitation section. And I've seen that most of the papers are passing through, the editor's eyes. Unfortunately, those problems should not occur in 2021 and 22. And the problem is that the choice of structural equation modeling, unfortunately, we've seen that, the people actually, they don't focus much attention, because what happened in the era of like SPSS, everybody believed that, yes, they understand statistics a lot. That's very easy. But again, we have to know that when to use CBSCM method and when to use PLSCM method actually. Are you trying to create a new theory or you are trying to test a theory? So, these are the fundamental issues are there. And unfortunately, in the discussion section, we find that it's like, people have exhausted their entire energy by the time they reaches to the discussion section. And it's something like a sketchy, and it's kind of like, formality based. So, what happens if there is no match between the introduction section and there is no match between the methods, choice of the methods, and when it comes to your discussion section, unfortunately, it's very, very difficult. On the other side, you've seen that people believe that if they're not comfortable with the quantitative method, they prefer qualitative research method. We have to understand that qualitative research method should be cautiously used actually when you are either advancing theoretical debate or building a new theory. And we need to answer the questions before entering into selection and choice of the cases. So I see that there are methodological perspective or philosophical stance is still very bad, and most of them, in fact, if you start screen the articles, out of 100 submissions, only 5 or 10 actually qualify all these parameters, and majority of them cannot be published even although those articles sometimes get published also. So these are the core issues that I think as an associate editor we address these issues. And it's sometimes very difficult because we have to rely on the good reviewers, but reviewers fail to take care of all these issues, and it becomes a very challenging task. Even if we, after receiving the good review report, we find that there are a lot of flaws in the manuscript, and it becomes very difficult for us to proceed ahead, and we give multiple rounds of revision. So I think these are the fundamental issues, and I believe that basics are not being taken care of while pursuing the research or while writing a manuscript, unfortunately, and everybody talk about the new topics, new areas, that's fine, but fundamentals still a bigger issue. And I think these are the points which I observed and which I believe that young researchers can carry the message from here, that they have to be very, very, clear when it comes to philosophical stance. Thank you very much.
Great comments, Dr. Dubey. I appreciated the highlights of your affiliation to the Journal of Humanitarian Logistics and Supply Chain Management. A lot of the journals you work with have a lot of meaning for the world at large, particularly today. Thank you so much for those comments on philosophy and so much more. I think we'll revisit them at the end of the panel. Now to our beloved Professor Yogesh Dubey, who has assembled this eclectic panel. Over to you, Yogesh.
Thank you so much, Katina. And I just noticed that there are few questions in chat box. I think we will kind of handle them at the end. And one question that been asked, what is novelty? And I'm sure we all have our perspective about it. So we will take that at the end. So I'm representing here International Journal of Information Management, which is ABDC A-star and other metrics you can see right at the end of this slide. The journal received more than 1,600 submissions in 2020, and we had about 81% desk rejection and 10.5% acceptance rate. So we be receiving very large number of submissions. Obviously, they all cannot be reviewed for various reasons. So therefore, desk rejections. So
There's your microphone. You mute it.
Katina, if I can request to move the slide. Thank you.
Yes.
So lots of these papers could get rejected, and not only by IJIM, all journals, all good quality journals receiving really many more articles than they can handle actually, and they can review. Again, reviewing is a very scarce resource. Reviewers are not available. Good quality reviewers are not available all the time. So we have to minimize the number of manuscripts that we can review. Our first task is to kind of screen out publications that we feel would not survive through the review process. And these are some of the reasons why we actually desk reject papers. Some of the common ones that I think that you should give attention is about having similarity of the content from the different sources that could be your own or someone else. If it's high similarity, most of the journals likely to desk reject. In kind of threshold is 15%, 10 to 15%. Many editors obviously look at kind of what kind of similarity is, but more or less they would reject if they find that chunk of the text coming from different sources in your manuscript. Same thing, I think Katina mentioned preparation. Preparation is very important. You really need to look at journal guidelines, author guidelines, what is required, what is actually absolutely necessary before you submit, what you can actually leave until your paper reaches to final stage. All that things you only get to know if you really look at the journal website, journal information that is provided to you. Scope of the article, your submission. Often we receive submissions that have nothing to do with journal. Obviously many of us are open for quite wide range of articles. But for example, if my journal is information management, it would be very difficult for me to process an article that is purely focused on marketing or human resource management or finance or operations research. We cannot handle those kind of papers. They does not fit to our scope. We don't have suitable reviewer to review those papers, and they're simply not in the right place for the readership. you may publish, but probably many people won't read it. So we obviously screen out most of the paper that actually are not aligned with the journal scope. Poorly structured and developed manuscript. Now, Kieran mentioned, number of things. Roba mentioned, Dr. Dubey, and all previous speakers mentioned some issues, and all those actually need to be there. If the sections are not there, or sections are not properly developed. For example, introduction. Often you just say things are not done. So things are not done. That does not necessarily means that research is needed. It's not done probably because it's not relevant. It's not timely. It's not novel. Or you might say it might be novel because it's not done, but it may not be timely and relevant. So if you are only presenting the research gap and not highlighting the research problem itself, then journal editors would be unlikely to be convinced to review those papers. So you must present the problems very clearly, business problem or research problems, and then you should highlight the research gap, that how that problem has not been addressed. Novelty, obviously we have a question there for novelty, which we will handle later. But novelty is not only means in terms of topic, but novelty also is important in terms of theory. So both theoretical and topical novelty we generally look for. And if you are lacking any of those, so topic might be new, but you are testing same theory who has been tested hundreds of times already. For example, TAM. So people keep submitting paper just using TAM. TAM has been tested in variety of context and variety of situation. And one more testing will not be sufficient to make educate contribution in top level journals. And therefore, those kind of paper likely to be disrejected. So these are some of the issues. I'm not going to elaborate more. Again, when it comes to, theoretical contribution, it doesn't matter it's a quantitative paper or qualitative paper. If it's quantitative paper, we would like to see a very strong theory development on front end. If it is qualitative paper, we would like to see a very strong theory development at the back end. Even if it's literature review paper, it's not sufficient to just present the descriptive review. We would like to see very strong theoretical contribution or theory development at the back end. So unless the manuscript demonstrate these elements, it's very difficult for us to push the manuscript to the reviewer, because we know the reviewer will pick up these issues and reject the paper, which will then waste editor's time, reviewer's time, and more importantly, author's time, because your manuscript was with us for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then you got rejection. You would have targeted that to more appropriate journal in the first place. So for these reasons, we generally obviously try to desk screen and try to desk reject papers as quickly as possible. It feels painful, not only to authors, but also to editors, but we have to do it for everyone's benefit. I would not take more time. Thank you very much, Katina, for bearing with me. So
thank you. Thank you for those valuable comments, Professor Yogesh. And we're moving straight on now to Marijn Janssen, ICT and Governance as a Specialization from Delft University in the Netherlands, and the Editor-in-Chief of Government Information Quarterly.
Thank you, Katina. Thank you also for Yogesh for the nice invitation for this very important panel, because this is one of the key issues that many of us face. And in my opinion, when we go to the next slide, is that publishing is an art. So it's quite hard to find a formula for it. Of course, we would love to do it, that we have some steps and we just follow them and then we arrive at a great paper with a great impact that can be published in any great journal. But yeah, there's nothing that works like that. Also for us, each time it's a struggle. And there's no single trick. That creativity is needed. And it's even worse than that, because what might work in this period might not work in the next period, because the situation changed or the type of research has been done. So we're changing it all the time. So when I would say what is most important, and that's why I put this at the top, is view it as a long-term investment. If you want to have a high-quality paper, you need dedication, attention, go into the details, go and for it, and it really takes time. You can't rush it. And don't be surprised if it takes years. Of course, we want to have the paper published next week and whatever, but it has a long time needed. And in the meantime, you have to keep motivated, because you have some setbacks, that maybe with the data collection, maybe with the first version of it. So what I always say, look what you really want to be proud of. What do you want to accomplish? What kind of impact do you want to accomplish? And that might also be different for some of us. For me, it's always important to have both a societal impact and a scientific impact, combine it, else I can't do it, because I will not be motivated anymore and I can't go on. People are different, so think about what you really want and you can be proud of in a couple of years when you get it published. Then the basis is, of course, sound data collection. So you have to think at the start what is acceptable also for the type of data, and journals differ in the type of data. Some like more subjective data, some like more objective data, some single scales for collecting data are not allowed by some journals, whereas others it's fine because it's more explorative. So it's also different. Think about it, what is really needed, and you have to think about it by the start, because it's impossible to repair it at the end, because you can't undo your data collection with that. Then there are different types of journals, and the reason why I'm here is as from Government Information Quarterly, and Government Information Quarterly is a domain journal. And what do domain journals require? Contribution to the domain. And what is required for that? Deep insight into the domain. When you're just used to having a quite generic one and you submit it to GIQ, well, you will likely have a desk reject, or maybe you pass that process and you get to the review process, but you will be rejected at the end because you don't contribute to the domain or you don't know the domain. And you sometimes see that some people who are not used to this domain, they submit to this domain. Don't do it. Well, because you don't know it, you don't know the in and out, and you can often see it from we just added. This is suitable for GIQ because it is about government or something like that. That's then added later to it, but it should be in the very foundation of the paper. So you can't repair it afterwards. Then, yeah, it is said already several times, the drivers, what new knowledge is needed and why is it needed is very important. And don't be too simple in it. What I think what you were saying, nest motivation, think about why is it really matters for that and why it's needed. And what Yogesh was saying, from just saying it has not been done yet is no reason for that. There might be a reason why it's not done yet, because nobody thinks it's relevant or something like that for that. So really think about the motivation and why you want to make it. And that's also the driver, motivation, why you do it, research. I think that's also linked to the person. Then theorizing. Theorizing is the most important what we do, but it's also most difficult. And many papers have no theorizing at all. In the ideal situation, we want to develop a new theory, but that's also the most important, and that's also the most difficult and the most long-term view you need to have when you want to do something like that. So that's quite difficult and challenges, but that can be your ambition. But then you have to start and then start running for years before you have that. For a domain journal, also knowing the key authors and key papers in that field is important. And it often happens that people submit and think, oh, well, we have something new. And then you look at that, yeah, but 10 years ago, I already read a paper like that. So know the key papers, know the key authors in the domain. And that's also the start. That's what you don't do afterwards. That's like the data collection. You do it at the beginning. You can't do it when you write the paper. You're very too late when you start writing the paper because everything is given. And also at the start, know the limitations. And some limitations are not acceptable by high quality journals. So if you know those are the limitations, well, you know already you're out of the business because you can't submit anymore. Try something else. Then, yeah, the message is always a struggle, and it can be very confusing, a message. So what I always try to convey is have a single and clear message. That does not mean there's one driver or there's one contribution or whatever, but there's one focus. And of course you decompose that and you make parts of it, but you have to have a clear focus for that, because you can't make a contribution in all domains. I contribute to AI and to this theory or whatever. Well, that's impossible to do it. Well, make sure that the paper fits the journal, and as said at the beginning, when we have discussion before it, ensure that people recognize it. If you add it later, it can be spotted, like the abstract. Then don't submit too hasty. Many iterations are needed. Oh, I know from my own PhD students, they want to submit today and not tomorrow. Well, I always have to block them. No, another iteration. No, look at this again. And sometimes we have to make a decision. Well, we put it somewhere for a couple of weeks and then we return to it because we have to think about it. That's how it works. You can't rush it. Well, of course, contact the editor. And there are also editor panels like this one. Contact the editors if you have an idea and they can also provide suggestions already at the early stages. Because if you've already finished that and then ask for advice, then it's often a yes or a no. Well, then you're too late. But at the early stages, there are a lot of panels at conferences like this, from ask them, from, oh, could this be developed into a good one? Well, then with the reviewers, as Yogesh said, they are scarce. So always look at the reviewers who are really in the field, to who you refer in it, who are critical and who are in the editorial board. And that helps you also to develop the paper better. And also, you shouldn't do that at the last stages, but at the early stages, because that determines your domain, where you're working on it, your foundation. Then I think, Katina, you start with that, with the collaboration. Learn from your peers, work together with people who are better than you. That's very important, because that will also raise your level. Learn from it. It's an art, it's a profession or something like that. So you have to practice that, and you can practice with people who already can do it. And then at the end, well, I want to give this for you. If you follow a standard approach, you will end up in a standard journal and not a high quality journal, in my view. So the message over here is also from, yeah, there's no recipe for doing it. Of course, we have those guidelines. We can give you help in it. But even if you follow it, you might not end up with the high quality paper, because all aspects are required for that. Well, that was my 6 minutes fame. Looking forward to the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Marijn. Invaluable once again. And we move on now to Professor Paul Jones of Swansea University.
Hi, thank you, and many thanks to the conference organisers and Yogesh for this opportunity. And apologies, I have a bit of a sore throat, so I'm sounding a little bit hoarse. So I'm the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Entrepreneurial Behaviour and Research. I'm also involved in a number of other journals, and I'll draw on those experiences in this 5 minutes. I welcome all my colleagues' comments. I think there's some very good practice that you can pick up from listening to them. An academic career, unfortunately, is very much grounded on rejection. As a professor, I still get rejections. But what we must do as Katina said, is to be persistent and be determined and learn from why we get rejection. So we get job rejections, we get grant rejections, we get journal rejections. So this is just the nature of our lives, and we have to develop and grow and be persistent. Can I have the next slide, please? So my journal is a journal which focuses on entrepreneurial behavior, anything in the context of small business management, entrepreneurship education. So it's a fairly generalist journal in that respect. We take qualitative and quantitative approaches. And I like what my colleague said about novelty and thinking forward in the theme of this conference about fluidity and the way the world is changing. You know, COVID has had a global impact on society, on culture, on businesses, on information systems, etc. So what we need to do now is to think about the future and what have we learned from the pandemic? What are the lessons learned, and what can we think about in the future about how things are going to change, what practices we can absorb, and how can we move forward in a constructive manner. So my journal is a full impact factor journal, and it's classified as an ABS3 in the UK system. And that is important in terms of we are supposed to consider journal quality of an international standing. So when you publish in a journal, consider the standard of that journal, and consider the standard of your paper. Is your work of international standing? You know, if you write a study, maybe in a regional context or in a single country context, how are those results generalizable for an international context? Sometimes writing just about one single country is not enough unless you're making those comparisons with other countries or similar countries or across regions, okay? So in terms of qualities, it is incredibly important. Journal editors get a very bad reputation. We want to publish your work, okay? But we are the standard bearers of quality for our journals. My journal is something, my rejection rate is something like 93% this year. You know, we take 1,100 submissions this year. I publish 90 papers per year at the moment. So it's very, very tough to get published. So you must position your paper as effectively as possible, okay? It's about looking at your target journal and understanding what has been written previously. So what will I learn from reading your paper, okay? What will I learn from reading your paper that I did not know previously? That is incredibly important. How does it add to the argument within that journal? So you must read that journal and you must understand how the argument is built within that particular manuscript or within that particular journal, okay? And it must add to it. So it is important to cite your target journal and build upon that argument. Can I have the next slide, please? So, you know, my typical journal structure is very, very standard. I'd just like to mention what I call the 15-minute test, and I'm sure all my fellow editors and associate editors do a similar thing in that I don't have a huge amount of time in my life. I'm a journal editor on the very side, you know, of a full-time job. So I do my journal editing in the evenings, on the weekends, etc. So I have literally 15 minutes to appraise a journal article. I will read the abstract, I will read the introduction. Now, if I'm still interested, I'll read the methodology and I'll read the conclusion. Now, if you can't convince me that your paper makes a contribution, and I mean an international contribution, by the time I've read your abstract and your introduction, I'll probably desk reject it, okay? So it's incredibly important that you clearly state your contribution to knowledge within your abstract. And often, you know, from my own experience, the abstract is the last thing we tend to write, or we tend to write it very, very quickly because we want to get our paper submitted. Take your time and think about it very, very concisely. The abstract is very important, okay? So how is it building on theory? How is it developing the argument? How is it filling gaps in the existing knowledge, okay? I like structure in papers, so I like to see a discernment between the discussion and the conclusion section. For me, the discussion section answers either hypotheses or research questions, And the conclusion section is discerned from that, in that it confirms the contribution to knowledge. It talks about implications for policy and practice. And in an entrepreneurship world, that is very important. So depending on your academic discipline, implications for policy and practice are becoming much more important. In the UK, we talk about research impact as a very, very significant thing. Okay, so a journal paper shouldn't just exist within a journal domain. It should go beyond that. It should have implications which are taken up by people in practice, in business practice, and within policy as well. Okay, recognize your limitations and recognize the future research opportunities arising from your paper. So I'll just conclude by saying, be persistent, be determined, but take your time. Make sure you develop your paper properly, set it in the right context, the journal you are targeting, and make sure it's embedded within that literature so it builds upon the existing contribution. Thank you, Katina.
Thank you, Paul. And again, the editor of Entrepreneurship, Behaviour and Research. Over now to Professor Thanos Papadopoulos. Welcome, Thanos.
Thank you, Katina. Thank you to the organizers and to Yogesh. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I have the pleasure and the honor to serve as an associate editor in two journals. One is the British Journal of Management, and the other one is the International Journal of Production and Operations Management. Both have a relatively high, or I would say very high for management, impact factor of around 6.6. And they are listed in the UK list, the one that we have, the CABS list, as 4, which is one of the highest, it's 4 and 4 star. What I will be talking is mostly what, brings a paper to be published in BJM and IGOPM, and what does not make it, take the paper to be published. So limitations of rejected papers have to do with, especially, contribution. I think everybody, all my fellow editors have mentioned this before. So weak theoretical contribution, very narrow focus is one of the things that we see and we desk reject, or even we reject. And the rejection may come, and my fellow editors would agree, not only, after the first round, it may come after the second or third round. And, my friend Rameshwar is there. I remember, we had a rejection in the past, and this was after the third round of reviews. Okay, at that point, you get very frustrated, but still, you get over it. And, especially with young people, young researchers, I think in my first rejection, I think I was crossed for around a day or a day and a half. Now I still get crossed, but after an hour, I relax and I say, we'll give it a go. We address comments. We go somewhere else. So theoretical contribution, focus, poor relevance to the journal. Fit. Have you done your homework? Have you read the journal? Have you spoken to the editors? Have you cited the correct references? Okay, you're citing, I don't know, a paper by Yogesh or by Katina, and you're saying that, they're claiming about something, but this is not their argument. And then guess what? Katina gets to review the paper and looks at it and say, what? Did I say this? No, I never said that. And this is one of the things that gets reviewer very, very annoyed. The editor gets annoyed as well, because it looks as if the work has not been done. You just want to rush it to be published, and you're not going to do that. And even more, you are rejected from BJN, and guess what? Your paper is just the same, and you see it in the IGOPM again as an editor, the same paper with no changes. And this is also something that needs to be very, very, very. We need to be very, very, very careful here, because you may get the same editor or the same reviewer. And again, have you done your homework after your rejection? Have you addressed the comments? Have you gone back to your lit review, or collected more data, done your analysis again? What have you done? Out of date referencing. I get papers and they say recent papers by, I don't know, Myers in 2001 well, this is not recent, is it? I mean, like 2001 may seem recent for me, I'm 44, but it's not very recent, it's like 20 years ago. So be sure that you are citing recent work. Now, what constitutes a publishable paper? Well, fit, addressing why and how questions, methodological robustness. I think Rameshwar mentioned this before. If you are retesting rather than contextualizing, does not get you published. So if you take time, Yogesh mentioned this, and you are using time and time again, what's the point? If you're taking RBV and you're saying you're contributing to RBV, make sure that you do contribute and you're not using it just for the sake of using it. Because these are key things, and it is very important that people do follow rules. The last thing, what I would like to say here is, and I will go back to I think Kieran who mentioned this. Make sure that you have one story in your paper, and you're not trying to say one story and then you are just lacking focus and you are saying 2,000 stories. Your data may be interesting. Sorry, your data may have may give you an important story, but make sure that you keep to one story. And something else that just came to my mind: we are all very stressed, not only because of COVID, because of tenure. And I say that especially to young researchers, who need to publish, 3-4 star journals, to get tenure and get a permanent position in university. We do understand that, and things have changed in the last 20 years. But make sure that you do your homework before setting a paper out. It is very, very important. Academia is a very small community. It's global, but it's small. It's better to be known for being a bit late and going over it and reading, rather than known for sending papers with no meaning and getting rejected all the time. So do your homework, review, read, and network with people who are better than you. We do it, and we're trying to do it as well in ourselves, and try to be as best as you can. And with this, I'll take on any questions that you may have. Thank you, Katina. Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Thanos. Again, Thanos from Kent University. He specializes in management, analytics, operations, and systems, and is an editor in the British Journal of Management for those interested in that field. Next up, we have a very good friend of mine, Professor Samuel Fosso-Wamba, who is from Toulouse Business School in France. He introduced the AI and business analytics stream there at Toulouse Business School. Over to you, Samuel.
Hey, good morning. Hi, thank you very much for the conference organizer, Yogesh, for inviting me, and Katina, Michael, it's always a pleasure to have you and listen to you. So it's always difficult to come after all this Yogesh, Katina, Kieran, Roba, and Rameshwar. So I just want to build on what they already said and say, when we talk about publishing into a top journal, we need to talk about a story, but we need to add an interesting story. So we need to make sure that we convince the editor or the reviewer that our story is interesting, that we should care about the topic we are working on. And this actually can lead to a text rejection, a rejection, or a revise and resubmit. And we as an author, we are targeting a revise and resubmit. And when we got this revise and resubmit, we need to make sure that we actually try to address all the reviewer comments. But before even writing the paper, we need to make sure that we did what Katina was saying. We need to do our homework. We need to look at the target journal. What are the editors saying about their statement? What type of paper they are looking? Robert also talked about this. For example, why should I submit a cross-sectional survey paper into a journal that clearly stated that in their editorial statement, they clearly said, They are not looking for cross-sectional paper, for example. So we need to look at what are the recent paper published into the target journal, what are the structure of the paper published in that journal, and try to see if we are actually matching this high level of requirement the editor are looking for. And also, Yogesh was talking about novelty. So when we talk about novelty also, it can be about the topic, it can be about the method. How am I using this method? How am I combining different theories to address my research problem and my research question? And also going back to everything to all what people have already said before, we need to make sure that we have a clear research objective and even add research questions. So sometimes, we need to put research objective, sub-research objective, and also add some of the research questions and also the expected contribution. And then many papers that are submitted sometimes, they will not even have in their introduction some of the expected contribution. And also we need to actually frame our paper in a way that when we look at different parts of the paper, we have a good flow. Talking about the introduction, what is the business problem or the problem we are trying to address. We don't need to talk about the literature review. How well are we building on what has been published in the target journal? Sometimes, I will review a paper from a journal. When you look at the list of references, there's no paper from that journal. So it's very strange. And then when you Google search within that journal, you find a lot of paper published on the topic within that journal. So that clearly indicates that you didn't do your own homework. And then also in terms of theory development, when you are developing your hypothesis, for example, you need to ensure that you are actually building on prior study and that your arguments are very strong. Because sometimes you see some hypotheses with very, very weak argument. It's very intuitive from the author. And another part is also the method. When we talk about the method, you only state that I collected data from 200 companies. And then, you are looking at the impact, for example, of AI or big data, and then you don't even ensure that where you're actually collecting the data are from company with prior experience or prior investment in big data. So you need to provide all the relevant information that will actually give more insight about the whole data collection process. And then another part of the paper I really like to look at is the discussion part. And then usually this discussion part of article, even from top journal, is very fuzzy. So you need to clearly structure that discussion part. We need to have one first paragraph where you have what Professor Venkatesh called the declaration of victory. How do I actually address the research gap I identify early in my introduction? And then you need to have what are the theoretical implications, what are the limitations, what are the practical implications. So this should be clearly stated, and then you should be every time going back to the theory base that you use to frame your article. Then also the conclusion. Usually sometimes they will merge discussion and conclusion, but this should really be separated. You need to have the discussion with all these dedicated subsections, and in the conclusion, which should be not very long, one paragraph or two paragraphs, where you actually basically synthesize what you did into the whole paper. And then when me as an associate editor or a reviewer, I look at the structure of the paper, I look at the flow of the paper, I'm more willing to actually give kind of a revise and resubmit to such paper than when we have structure going all over the paper. You need to find where is actually the objective of the paper, what are the expected contribution, what are the research questions. So when everything is fuzzy, then you start looking more about problem within the paper. But when the structure is good, the objectives are very clear, the research questions are very clear, the story is interesting, we are more willing to look at how to provide guidelines to improve the paper and give a revise and a submit. I think I will stop here and then looking forward for questions.
quite incredible, Samuel. For those early career researchers in the audience, even for those more mature researchers who are wanting to get into that basket of eight or otherwise, we have among us in Professor Samuel and also Professor Yogesh, two highly cited scholars based on Clarivet statistics and other citation rankings, and we listen with open ears, but also among us people with over 10,000 citations. But to our last speaker, who I would say is one of the most renowned female researchers and really growing from strength to strength, is Professor Cleopatra Veloutsou, who is a professor of brand management and the EIC of the journal titled Journal of Product and Brand Management. So I welcome you, Cleopatra. We started with Dr. Abbas and we end this speaker session to this point with Cleopatra.
You are nasty with me, very bad, because you took me, the little Greek lady, right, that started from a little house with people with no education and tried to do what she is now, that is nothing. It's nothing compared to what most of you have achieved. Put her in the end of a series of very insightful talks, and you told her, come on, now you are developing, you are, achieving, and you need to prove yourself. To prove yourself compared to whom? To all these legends? Because most of the people who spoke before me are legends. So you are putting me in this difficult situation, and that's why I didn't provide any slides, because I knew that all the previous people must have said most of the things I had in my mind to say anyway. And I decided to work without slides. Based on my limited experience, because I'm learning every day, I'm a learner, I'm a student, I'm learning from you, I'm learning from my students, I'm learning from reading papers in the journal and so on and so forth. And that we try to not necessarily summarize, but to open another light in what we have discussed so far in the next 4.5 minutes that I have left. I would suggest that we shouldn't be looking at the papers as us, but we should be looking at our papers as independent entities. And because we do have some emotional attachment with them, I would suggest to you to look at them as your children. So think about each one of your papers as a child of yours, and think about publishing a paper, your attempt to secure for these children a very good job offer. Start thinking like that. So you need first to give birth to this child, and what giving birth to this child means? It means that you have a great idea that is unique, that is acceptable, that says something new, and go to all the previous talks of all my colleagues and get information from them. I'm not going to repeat the same and the same, right? Make sure that this idea has a vision and try to think what could be something of interest in relation to this child. Why this child could get this super job in Harvard, in our field, or I don't know, Cambridge, all the other top universities on planet Earth, right? If this child was an academic. Having said that, start thinking, what now that I know what the other people have in this kind of jobs, which is the other researchers' production and the other papers, what my child needs to really have been equipped with. In other words, what data, what theories, and so on and so forth. And start working around that. So don't think a project, a paper, or a project, 2 papers, or 3 projects, 1 paper. Start thinking what each child really requires. Some children might need 5 studies. Some children might produce 5 papers. Some projects might produce 5 children, 5 papers. So don't start by thinking a project, an output. Start thinking an idea, a contribution, how I need to build up this child to get somewhere. And when you have data and you have analyzed the data and you see that your original vision starts working, then do the journal targeting trip. And what is a journal targeting trip? Take this child and assume that you put it in the conversation with 2 or 3 members of the editorial board and 5 or 6 employees of the journal, meaning papers that have been published in the journal. And let your child, your paper, talk with these people. Try to see how this child can really impress these people, the research of the editorial board members and the other papers that have been recently published in the journal. And make sure that this child can produce and project himself or herself to this audience. If you feel that this is something that this child, this paper can actually do, this is a good journal to publish. If that is a 4-star journal, great. If it is a 3-star journal, great. If it's a 2-star journal, great. In our journal, we receive some papers that are very good, but are talking about social media, via product and brand management. So it cannot talk with the other papers, and it cannot talk with the editorial board members. It doesn't mean because you are rejecting the journal that your paper is not good, your child is not good. So you need to link the two. When you feel that they are linked, start writing the paper. Don't write the paper having in mind that you will find a journal to target, or do not finalize the writing before you have a journal in your mind. A paper should be talking to that journal. And if a paper is rejected from that journal, you should update it, change it, and make it able to discuss with the audience of the other journal. And remember, in all this discussion with the editorial board members and with the other papers, have somebody who listens and try to see how things go. And this is the editor. The editor will listen to this discussion, will listen to you, to your child, not you, and to the reviewers, and will make a decision. Editors do not typically, if they are good, in my opinion at least, blindly follow the advice of reviewers. They work as a buffer mechanism. Some reviewers are more strict, some reviewers are more linear. They see what is the potential pool of employees of papers submitting the journal, and they are trying to get the best for that year. So all this review process is your interview rounds to get a job, to make sure that this child has a job. And in this case, it's easy because the job is for life. You don't have to do it again. When your paper gets the job, is accepted, then you move looking after your following children. The same, more or less, for all papers. And unfortunately, I can tell you from my limited experience that some papers go to very good jobs, some papers go to medium kind of jobs, and I have a couple of papers that stayed unemployed. I don't know if I'm the only one from this crowd, but I know other people that have papers that invest a lot of time writing, and because of various reasons, they never got published. Katina said something very wise when she started this session, and I thank everybody, the organizers and the others that helped me develop this thing for what she said and what they said, because I couldn't have said this little story and little thing without them. But Katina said, you need to be persistent. So you need to know that not all your papers, not all your children will manage to get to the top jobs. It's sad, it's real. We need to know that, we need to accept that, because otherwise it's very painful. That's all from me. I hope that didn't take much more than my 5 minutes, and all the best with all your children. Bye.
Thank you. We need you. If we can have you still on, Cleopatra. What an analogy to finish up on, and a great story with a simple one storyline focus, which we've continuously stressed this afternoon. Wonderful words from you. Thank you so much. You know, this panel is all heart. That's how I feel. And we'll now open up the floor to Q&A. I'll stop sharing for a moment and offer to spotlight everyone one by one onto this screen. As I ask my first question, and I go from strength to strength here, I'm going to ask a question on novelty, and I'm going to aim that question to Ramesh. That's when the question came up, on novelty, and any of our other panelists who would like to contribute. Ramesh, would you like to unmute and share with us your thoughts on novelty?
Well, novelty is often considered as a debatable conversation, because when we talk about theoretical contribution, novel theoretical contribution, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to decide whether it's making a really novel contribution. Of course, contribution backed by scientific rigor is something which we are more interested. Because sometimes what happens, even the marginal contribution in current situation is also a very useful contribution.
Hello?
We cannot deny that.
Am I audible?
We cannot expect that, that it has to be a Nobel Prize winning, kind of work actually. But yes, some contribution, even the marginal contribution, even extension also, but backed by a scientific rigor. As we all agree that Professor Paul Jones and all the professors who have actually shared their views about that novelty actually. See what happened when we talk about theory basically, why there is a need to propose a theory. In fact, like when we talk about case studies, unfortunately case studies, we talk about whether it really contributes to the theoretical development. This is what Eisenhardt in 1989 seminal work actually argues actually. And in continuation, what happened, many articles has been written in favor of that. In fact, there was an article published in 2014 by Ketekivi and Coy, 2014, which talks about how do you decide that what should be your sample size in case of case analysis? Already the Robert Ian and Eisenhardt have argued that sample size should be, but the statement is about level of saturation. So, when we talk about theory development, it's something which is very, very important, and it really makes, even the marginal contribution is very useful in present situations where most of the work has been carried out, but is your data, is your methodology support that claim is something which is more important. Scientific rigor is something which is very, very important at this stage actually. Yeah, I think my other colleagues can take over the, because it's, of course, it requires multiple perspectives. It cannot be from one perspective. If we talk to David Wetton, he will say, yes, if you have successfully answered 6 questions, yes, it makes a theoretical contribution. If we talk to Sutton and Storr 1995, yes, they have their own perspective. But of course, everybody have their own perspective. But yes, I believe even marginal contribution in current scenario is a very useful contribution, provided that it is well backed by scientific rigor. Thank you. Over to everyone. They can extend my discussion.
Okay. Katina, I think Giampaolo might leave early, so it will be nice to hear from him and also from Kieran, because obviously
Yes.
4-star, there is something different from others. So it will be nice to hear these two perspectives and Marijn. And I think Paul had already mentioned about novelty. So, yeah.
Over to you, Giampaolo. Thank you, Yogesh.
Yeah, so are we dealing with novelty, or there are other specific questions that you want my idea on?
Novelty specifically, that was raised during your actual presentation.
Yes, so I would say that, as we say during this talk, the world has changed quite a lot. So we want to make sure we get something novel, not only in terms of the topic, but also in terms of the perspective and the approach. Meaning that, for example, let me give you a clear example. There are some COVID papers that start saying, COVID is a pandemic that started in March in one, blah, 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 blah. We all know that. So we want to get some papers that are dealing with the future, that are dealing with how to overcome that, if it's dealing with COVID or how it change psychological or business or day-to-day activities. So to me, what is novel is something that I feel, oh, that's exciting or that's new, and maybe it's counterintuitive. So sometimes we have firm feelings on something, and there is an idea that say, hey, maybe there is something else that you never considered that in this picture, and that's why you find that effect. That's something novel. So I would say something counterintuitive, something exciting, something that deals with a relevant topic that really might become something novel.
Thank you, Giampaolo. In fact, Kieran, you said something about Aegis being a journal that picks up these different kinds of papers.
Yeah, actually, just to continue Giampaolo's point for a second, because this one about really showing the novelty is really important and really hard to do. So, and Giampaolo, we have a great example. The number of papers we get in now that say, oh, well, now because of COVID, things are different, and, you know, again, liquid, fluid, dynamic, and whatever. So just to give one concrete example, I'm going back to an area I used to work in. I'm not active anymore, but if I think of systems development, I've seen papers that say, oh, well, you know, now with COVID and the pandemic and this dynamic world, we need new development methods. So if I saw that, I'd say, well, oh yeah, they handle change and are able to deal with this dynamism. My response as an editor or reviewer will be, actually, no, agile development is the whole point of agile and methods have been around for 20 years has been to deal with change, actually. So no, I'm not sure we do need new methods simply because of COVID. So, okay, that'll be one standard way of stating your contribution. A better way would be to say, you know, we've had methods around for a long time that deal with change. So, for example, agile, you know, methods like Scrum are based on the idea that we have a sprint every 2 weeks. Okay. Now, the problem with COVID is, as I can show you through a number of citations, people can't predict 2 days, 3 days ahead. The virus is escalating and changing and is having a dramatic impact on how we handle the virus and how we handle vaccinations and the technology that's needed with it. So the idea that agile is going to handle change when agile is built on 2 weeks, 2 week changes is not sufficient. We need a method that can do something faster than 2 weeks and can handle the pace of COVID. Now that's all of a sudden turned something very bland and dismissed, I would say, by reviewers into something very, very concrete and very clear. And you're showing that previous methods, while they did deal with change, didn't deal with it aggressively enough. So if you can come up with some specific example and specificity about your contribution and exactly why it's a contribution, that's really important. So what I'd say with just then specifically on Aegis, I know we have this spirit of being a little bit different and accepting papers that might be a little left field or controversial or be, you know, very, you know, contradict the commonly accepted assumptions of the discipline. And also we accept things, you know, we value actually things like different methodologies rather than the standard flavor of the month, you know, structured equation modeling or whatever. We accept them too, but we would give bonus points for something that's trying to do something methodologically that's different or weird or whatever. Because again, this eclectic mix is what makes academia great. The unfortunate thing is, I'm not sure exactly what that means. All I can say is that we have, I'll put it this way. If I get a submission into Aegis, and it's, we'll say this weirdness or the thing that makes it very distinctive and different is philosophical, then I might think of somebody like Franz Rowe, because Franz loves the weird and different stuff. And then there are other people that are, you know, very strong experts in quantitative methods, and they're experimenting and trying and publishing on research on quantitative methods, not just doing it, but you know, thinking about how it should be done differently. then I'd pick them. So I think that's how, we don't have any formula for those unique or different papers, but I think we have a very nice profile of people, senior editors and associate editors, who think differently and appreciate different approaches and maybe weird approaches. So what I'd suggest is, if you were thinking of submitting to Aegis, I'd look at our AE and SE list and not just think about who's in my area of research, but also maybe who might be more in your spirit of your research. So Franz Rowe is a good example of a past editor who your work may not be similar to his at all in terms of topic, but actually in terms of the strange and the weird philosophical perspectives he might take, yours is similarly different or similarly weird. And again, Franz is a person who would really appreciate those differences. So I think looking for AEs and SEs on the board who are writing in the same style and spirit as you, even if not the same topic. And just as a final point as an editor, what I would typically do is, if we have to assign an SE or an AE or reviewers, I typically try and get a nice mix. So you'd have somebody who can review your paper from the topic point of view, but then also somebody who might appreciate the difference or the unique nature of your work philosophically or methodologically or whatever, and I get them to review that part of it. So together, one reviewer will cover the topic and make sure you're doing well there. The other person might appreciate the style of paper and the uniqueness of the paper and be able to comment on how unique and how different that is, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you so much, Kieran and Giampaolo. Thanos, did you have anything to add on that line of thinking on this question? We're having some technical difficulties, Thanos.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes, go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yes? Okay. Sorry, I lost you at one point. Well, not much, I would say, and especially when it comes to ISOPM, and Aegis, that are four-star journals. And going to the example that Giampaolo mentioned about COVID, personally, and as an associate editor, I don't want to see any COVID papers again. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Personally, when it comes to COVID, I don't think we're interested as a journal, for instance, anymore. We're interested to see what's beyond COVID. So when we see something which says, as Kieran very correctly said, it's because of COVID, we live in a dynamic environment and there are challenges, and people do not work as they used to work, and we have there's a need for more systems or systems adoption or whatever, or supply chains or information technology and supply chains. These are well-researched topics. So this may have been important 2 years ago. But for us, it is very important to move on. Also, a way to see, to check for novelty is look at recent review papers. Look at review papers that we publish. They're published in our sibling, the International Journal of Management Reviews, but look for review papers that provide a critical review of the literature, and see whether your paper responds to the questions that these papers phrase or these papers pose.
Thanos, thank you, especially for the technical difficulties. We were able to understand you. Thank you so much. We are going to cross to the live audience at IIM Nagpur, and we are going to ask for an audience question from someone who's physical there in person. Can the host of Nagpur at IIM please provide their question? Wonderful. They're coming to the stage, everyone.
Namaste from India. It was a really enlightening session. I have a question that is submitting a paper in journal. Sorry. Okay. Submitting a paper in journal, if two or more reviewers have a contradictory reviews to the same manuscript, then what should be the strategy to deal with that? If two or more reviewers have the same, from the same journal, have a contradictory reviews to the same manuscript.
Who would like to take that question from the panel?
I'm happy to start.
Yogesh?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So I think Giampaolo already has suggested something in the chat box. But what I say, obviously, you are the author. You know the best that what is actually most appropriate for the work. So you first, rather than thinking anything, first very carefully read the reviewer comments and see which reviewer comments makes really sense, given the type of paper you have developed, and try to address those comments first. And then the one that doesn't make sense, I would say, respond nicely, respond politely. So don't outrightly reject it, but say that given the first reviewer has said so and so and have and the revised manuscript has addressed in this or that way, this is not possible, or this might be less appropriate. And the second thing, as Giampaolo suggested, that you might approach associate editor or editor to seek advice that given these contradictory comments, what should I do? I have addressed in this way. Don't go blank, because going blank, meaning that you are relying on editors, editor wouldn't tell you directly anything. So you go with what you have done and how you have approached, and seek advice how to progress further. This is how I would approach this as an author in terms of when I receive contradictory. And it's quite common. It's not that you are receiving alone. Most of us would have received these kind of contradictory comments from reviewers. So very common phenomenon.
Cleopatra, I see you have something to add there as well. Thank you, Yogesh.
If possible, think of the analogy I suggested earlier. This is your child, and your child is in an job interview situation. In some occasions, they might ask your child to strip and dance with no clothes. Are you willing to do that or not? Think how you would like your child, that will always be your child and will be in your CV, looking like in the end. This paper is going to be a part of who you are, this child of yours. And consider that as you are answering. Consider what you are willing to do, what kind of additional training you might give to your child. So more data, more literature, more something. And what you think that your child shouldn't be doing, because it's your child. You don't give it away. Yeah, so keep in mind that this is your child. I don't know if I helped, but I hope I did.
Yes, fabulous, Cleopatra advice. And over to Paul Jones now.
Yeah, I completely agree with Cleopatra and Yogesh there. It's about defending your position, but it's also about getting the reviewers on side. So with a 3 or 4 star journal, you typically have 3 or 4 reviewers. And what I tend to do, obviously I try to respond to all reviewers, but I always try to get to make sure I meet at least 2 of the reviewers. So I know that I'll get 2 reviewers accepted, and I might have sort of majors and minors with the other 2 reviewers. So that moves the balance of power towards me, in that I've got 2 of the 4 reviewers accepted. Now, ultimately, I've got to get the 4 reviewers on side. But when they begin to see that 2 of the reviewers are satisfied, they might moderate their views a little bit more. So it's that being strategic about it, recognizing the problems you can solve immediately, providing a robust argument back to both the editor, who might be supportive of your paper, and trying to convince the reviewers of the direction of travel of your paper.
Thank you, Paul. And I know from experience, good EICs will act as a buffer between the diverse reviews, sometimes needing to take away perhaps a review that was not on cue, or at times balancing it with additional reviewers. And some of the top journals, of course, with 5 reviews per round, excessive but needed. I'm going to change a little bit of tact and go to Samuel and Dr. Roba Abbas. I know both of you are always keen on special issues. And one of the questions that came to me was, both of you mentioned special issues to a point. How do prospective guest editors approach you to actually submit a special issue? I think, Roba, we'll start with you first.
Thank you, Katina. I might talk about the process, Katina, of submitting a special issue proposal, or the recommended way that I guess guest editors should approach the process. And it's somewhat like approaching paper writing and collaboration. And some of the ideas around novelty that my fellow panelists have discussed do apply in this situation. So I know from the perspective of transactions, and that translates to other journals and publication outlets as well, the suggested process for submitting a special issue for consideration to the board typically begins with a definition of an appropriate theme. So one way you can demonstrate that novelty that we spoke about previously, whether there's a gap or need for a particular topic or theme, as discussed again by fellow panelists. And this is typically followed by assembling a guest editorial team that subsequently would develop a proposal. So in transactions, this would be something like a 4 to 5 page proposal. During this time, it's good practice to contact the editorial team or the editor-in-chief. From our perspective within the transactions, we typically ask guest editorial teams to propose the working title for the special issue around a particular theme. And this theme must have a global appeal, for example, and take into account considerations such as gender equity and geographic diversity in composing that proposal. The proposal will also include details of the guest editors, some of which will have international standing and will be experienced, noting their affiliation, perhaps evidence of track record, and importantly, their suitability to lead or to contribute to the special issue editorial team. Other details that are generally regarded as good practice is to provide an abstract or description of the proposed special, an overview of topicality and significance, a literature review or an overview of current scholarship, and the provision of a bibliography is a good idea that would clearly demonstrate the need for the proposed special. And also what we generally recommend in transactions is details of potential authors and reviewers that would be approached. As part of that process, this proposal would be reviewed and potentially approved by the editor-in-chief or the co-editorial team, who would likely provide feedback into that process.
Thank you, Roba. Sunil, I know you've done so many different publications and specials.
Okay. So thank you very much. So building on Roba's, I would just add that some journals will actually require the time frame of the special issue, and also the maximum number of articles that you may accept. So for example, some journals will say we don't want more than 10% acceptance rate. So you need to take all this in consideration when you are building your special issue team. And then also I had an experience where actually the chief editor wanted a kind of the same number of women as men. So so they actually required to remove one man to the guest editorial board and look for one woman that is within the field to make 2 men and 2 women. So there are a large variety of requirements that you may have when you are editing special issue. In some other journal also, even though you have the guest editorial team, the lead guest editor don't actually have any power in assigning reviewer or actually deciding which type of reviewer they will assign in the initial stages. So different journals, different guest editorial process. But what is very important is that you need always to make sure that the special issue is actually adding to the body of knowledge, is filling an important gap. And then in some other aspect also, the chief editor may contact someone to say, okay, look, we know that you are leading this field. will you be willing to put together a guest editorial team about this topic? And then you will actually work with a team to draft the special issue, and then you will iterate with the chief editor in order to have something that is suitable to get published as the special issue and the call for paper. So there are many various aspects, that you may face when you are drafting a special issue. You can also contact the editorial, the chief editor, and say, look, I'm planning to work on this topic. Is it suitable to write a special issue for your journal? And then the editor will say, no, we don't want this. Can you change the scope of the initial ideas, add this, combine with this idea and with the other ideas, and then you can submit for analysis and for my own input. So it's always good to have this communication with the chief editor to ensure that what you are proposing fit what they are looking for. And then it's something also, you need also to ensure that you have a lot of time to actually manage the whole guest editorial team, because you may have very senior people and early career research, and then how do you actually handle this team if you are the lead guest editor? Because sometimes you need to also have their input in order to decide about, should we send this paper out for review or not? So you need to organize, find the time to share the document with them, because you are the lead guest editor is the only person who actually have access to the submission system. So you need to make sure you have time to download all the paper, create a folder, and then find a way to share all the content with the rest of the editorial team in order to decide about which paper should be sent out for review, which should be desk reject, and so forth. So you need to actually do kind of project management when you are guest editoring a special issue.
Thank you, Sam.
And then I want to get back to the novelty. For example, when we have a theory base, let's say that we have a theory base that states that we have a positive and significant relationship between A and B, and then you are doing your research and then you find the opposite. So you can actually reframe by showing that, by trying to explain under which conditions we actually have an opposite between A and B. And this can be actually a novelty if you can frame it very well. So sometimes you need to look at these things. If you have a contradictory finding, and then you can actually, instead of just disregard that contradictory finding, you can look at what are the conditions and the context under which we actually have this contradictory finding, and then you can show that that's novelty also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. What wonderful perspectives. To the last question I have for the panel, although there are many, and thank you to the panelists for responding. We will get to everyone's questions post the event, but Marijn, Janssen, I have one question for you, if I can get your attention before we cross to Yogesh to give the final thanks and close. You mentioned the importance of societal impact and scientific impact. And we also had a question on whether a paper has to be enthralling to the international community or just to the local. Could you respond to these two questions? So the notion of societal impact and scientific impact, and whether a paper has to be appealing beyond the domain to an international audience and international impact.
Well, it's of course, this is a quite challenging question. It's in the eye of the beholder, from who's looking at it and what you want to do. And it's also different for the type of journals you're talking about. The reason why it's important for me, because I think you should be motivated for doing it, and you make a difference. When I retire, by that time, I want to make a difference, and that difference does not come from the number of citations or the number of high quality journal publication. That difference will come from the impact on society. And when I apply for funding, most of the time the funders also ask that. especially within the Horizon 2020 projects or National Science Foundation also. We also that, and we are even not allowed nowadays with the National Science Foundation project to include your hate score or whatever, because they won't consider it anymore. So also society wants to have a societal impact. So that's for me very important. What is very difficult is to have both a scientific and societal impact. One is easy, combining the two is quite different. And you should also do it. I was asked for reviewing a paper, and they said we reviewed the literature in the top 8 basket, and it was not found in the top 8 basket. And as a reviewer, I knew the other domains, and I added to it, yeah, but those papers already exist, but it's outside your literature review. So what are you going to contribute? Is this the research that, of course, I didn't mention in the review, but when I would reflect on that, is this the research doing for the sake of the research? Or is it really for another reason, for advancing our field and providing new knowledge and also adding more to the society? That. So that's quite difficult for that. So that's why I also say it's in the eye of the beholder. And currently,
excuse me, am I audible?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but actually we have one more session starting and we are actually exceeding the time. So if you would allow me, I would like to come to the session with your permission.
Yes. Can we give the last word to Professor Yogesh, just to give thanks? Thank you, Nimesh.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Katina, and thank you all panelists. I'm so grateful for everyone for giving your time, valuable time for this purpose. I know there are lots of questions here and very relevant one, which especially early career researchers like to clarify for their publication process. We hope to clarify some of those questions through other means, as Katina mentioned. But you know, it was great opportunity for all of us to come together and share our thoughts. With this, given that obviously we don't have time, thank you so much, everyone, audience as well, for bearing with us and for being with us. Thank you so much.
We'll be forwarding the questions to you all. And on behalf of Nagpur, I'd like to thank everybody, all of you, for being part of this ISDSI-Global Conference 2021. And Nagpur, we strongly believe in creating sustainable environment, and that is then keeping that as a tradition, we'd like to present you with a unique, living and cutting guest that reflects our ethos. A tree has been planted on your behalf on the periphery of Sundarban Forest in West Bengal as part of Tree for Tribals program. We'll be mailing you the certificates as a memento shortly in your respective email IDs. Thank you so much.